All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Input Bundling, a Business-Led Strategy to Improve Soybean Yields. This webinar is presented by the Soybean Innovation Lab, a USAID Feed the Future initiative to promote soybean production and utilization in Sub-Saharan Africa, in collaboration with CAB International and N2Africa. My name is Ashley Negley, and I am a program specialist with the Soybean Innovation Lab. I will be moderating your webinar today. I'm so excited you could be here with us today. We have so many great panelists lined up and registrants from 30 different countries and panelists located in 5 different countries for today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to give everyone a quick overview of how to use the GoToWebinar software, which you can use to engage with other panelists, ask questions, and access webinar resources. On your GoToWebinar control panel, you will see a questions pane. Please type your questions in as they arise. We will collect all of your questions and address as many as possible during the question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Questions that are not answered during the webinar will receive a written response after the webinar has concluded. Also, there should be a handouts pane on your GoToWebinar control panel where you can access the slides, the agenda, and a little bit of information about the input bundles. I will give a quick introduction of today's presenters before turning it over to them to present all this great content on input bundling. Today, we are fortunate to have 4 panelists with us to discuss business-led input bundling. Panelists, if you wouldn't mind sharing your webcams, we'd love to see your lovely faces. Dr. Peter Goldsmith is the director of the Soybean Innovation Lab and a professor of Agribusiness Management at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He will be giving an overview of the economics of bundling, complete with evidence from Northern Ghana. Edward Baars is a Senior Business Development Officer with the N2Africa Project. Edward is a Dutch citizen based out of Nigeria. He will be giving us a snapshot of bundling experiences from the field. Mr. Abdul-Rahaman Tawfic is an agricultural engineer and entrepreneur running a nucleus farm, Big Ajar Enterprise, located in Upper West Ghana. Mr. Tawfic will be talking about a business-led input bundling scheme. And also with us is Duncan Sones, a consultant working in partnership with CAB International on communications initiatives related to best agriculture practices and a stepwise bundling investment in agriculture throughout Sub-Saharan Africa. Duncan will cover the implications of input bundling. A quick few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Dr. Goldsmith to kick off our webinar today. Stay tuned throughout the webinar because we'll be launching 4 interactive polls that you won't want to miss. Today's webinar is being recorded and a link to the webinar will be circulated to you after the webinar. Don't forget to submit your questions through the questions pane on GoToWebinar. We'll be addressing those all at once our presenters conclude. Now I'll turn things over to Dr. Goldsmith, who will talk to you a little bit about the economics of bundling.
Thanks, Ashley. Really appreciate it. Let me just adjust here. Great. Welcome, everyone. So glad you can join us. We wanted to start off with just an overview, kind of set the stage of how the team is thinking about soybean inputs and the concept of bundling. So let me take you through a quick primer on soybean bundling and some of the underlying economics. Yeah. Technology adoption, many of you are aware, has a rich body of literature of how to introduce new technologies to agricultural producers. One of the questions and challenges, and maybe even a gap within that literature, is really understanding how practitioners need to transfer long jump technologies. Long jump technologies as opposed to short jump or incremental technologies, involve significant changes by smallholders. And soybean would be such a technology. We're talking with a commercial crop as opposed to a native staple traditional crop. Soybean requires inputs, requires a effective planting bed, seed bed, high seed populations, relationships with seed suppliers, correction of the soil, and has significant gender equity implications. So this is a soybean involves a significant change for producers, hence the concept of a long jump technology. So when you have a long jump technology, there are high fixed cost barriers, meaning it takes a lot of investment to understand the technology, gain knowledge, gain experience, a relatively flat learning curve. So they're high fixed costs. There's technical complexity. Soybean is a commercial crop, thus requires engagement with input dealers and input suppliers, the use and understanding of how the inputs interact with each other, as well as connection to markets for sale of grain. And then the concept that's used in the literature is a characteristic of it lacks facile input divisibility, simply meaning soybean and many commercial crops are system crops. You don't just throw soybean into the ground, maybe from saved seed, and expect a profitable and successful crop. So the system's nature adds to the burden and the complexity. Hence, again, soybean as a long jump technology. So in thinking about how to introduce a long jump technology like soybean, SIL engaged what are called omission trials. And omission trials break down the various inputs and practices to understand how they interact with each other and how they should be implemented in a stepwise fashion. What should go first, what should go second, and what are the best returns in terms of yields and profitability. Out of these omission trials, and these have been conducted since 2013 by Dr. Awunyi and Dr. Reynolds at Mississippi State University, there are 5 essential bundles. The white bundle is the traditional, farmer traditional bundle. This yields about 637 kilos per hectare, involves safe seed, low seed population, and minimal inputs. It's mostly a labor bundle. The red bundle involves good management and appropriate technologies like ridge planting, use of certified seed, high seed populations in the area of 300,000 seeds per hectare, narrow rows, and narrow seed spacing. The yellow bundle then looks at the addition to the red bundle of inoculum, very important complement to seed. The blue bundle now adds in phosphorus. This is a limiting macronutrient that tropical soils require. And finally, the green bundle involves soil correction, raising the pH to promote a healthy soil environment. So when we needed to provide evidence exactly how these bundles perform before going ahead and recommending them. So over time, with the data and the research at SIL's smart farms in northern Ghana, we have some very compelling and interesting results. You'll see in the first column the bundles: red, yellow, blue, and green. And red is, as I said previously, the improved bundle using good practice, high seed populations, and certified seed. In the yellow bundle, that second column, you see we add inoculum. The blue, we add phosphorus, and green, we engage in soil correction and add in lime. You can see from the baseline white bundle of 637 kilos per hectare, you get an immediate jump by ridge planting, high seed populations, high quality seed, and a proper seed bed. So that jumped to 1,372 kilos. The yield continues to rise to over 2 tons per hectare as you stepwise move up the technology curve. The cost per hectare, of course, are also going to increase. And this is very important to understand. Is the yield, the increased yield, sufficient to compensate for the additional costs? And these are costs in US dollars. So the cost to produce the traditional, mostly labor bundle, the white bundle, is $295 per hectare, while using the full set of inputs, stepwise increasing to the green bundle, adds $200 to the cost of production. So does it pay? We see that there's increased yield. So we look at the marginal revenue, the second to last column from the right, and we see that the revenue increases $349 when you use improved practices, but costs are only increasing $80, a 4.4x return on your investment. And when you add inoculum, which adds additional costs, moderately additional costs, yield jumps again, and you have almost a 6x return on investment. So at each of these technologies and stepwise increasing, implementing the technologies, you can see that profitability rises significantly, as does yield. And having yield at these levels and this level of profitability, this is a critical for farmers to sustain their production, not go in and out of the crop from year to year, so that buyers know that there will always be soybean on the market. So a secondary question, now that we understand the evidence, is about the marketing campaign, because the idea is that the input dealers need to think about bundling and marketing to their customers a combination of products that fits the farmers' budgets. So a marketing campaign that employs a red bundle, essentially a complete set, packaged level of inputs per in sizes of, say, a half acre, acre, or even hectare, could be a red bundle, a yellow bundle, and green bundle, giving farmers choice on how much they want to invest in the planting of their crop. So in terms of next steps, we understand that the research is pretty clear. The stepwise progression through bundles from simple to more complex bundles makes good economic sense. We'll be replicating, expanding the smart farm in these omission trials to Ethiopia, Malawi, and Zambia. We're also thinking about additional bundles called maybe the purple bundle that involves herbicide treatments to reduce hand weeding, reduce labor costs, and increase yield. A big next step is the extension research. How might input dealers adopt bundling? This is an important and complex topic on a standard industrial practice of combining product and service. So training is going to be needed. SIL and its partners will be working on scaling the application of input bundling to the private sector. So we'd love to collaborate. Certainly there are critical issues related to credit and risk management. And so collaborators helping us work through those technical issues would be really, really welcome. So thank you very much. That's all I have, and look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Thanks so much for your remarks, Pete. I'm back to moderate our first set of poll questions. So the first question that we've got here for you today is, how important would it be to you or your organization to have bundles based on scientific tested results? So we'd like for you to choose one answer between very important, important, neutral, somewhat important, and not important at all. Again, how important would it be to you and or your organization to have bundles based on scientific tested results? And yes, please forgive me for the typo in the poll question. It should be bundles based on scientific tested results. And then leave the poll open for just a couple more seconds. So don't hesitate to submit your answers because we'll be moving on to the next poll shortly. How important would it be to you or your organization to have bundles based on scientific tested results? All right, I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. So just to give you an overview, it looks like 76% of respondents marked it as very important to have bundles based on scientific results, and 17% were citing that it's important. So I think it makes a lot of sense why we're here today to talk about the scientific approach to bundling. Thank you so much for submitting your responses to that question. And I'm going to follow up immediately with a second poll just to get some sense on the bundles that Dr. Goldsmith just talked about. So our second poll question, do you think adding insurance to the red or entry-level bundle would be attractive if it were less than 10% of the cost, of the input cost, I should say? So do you think adding insurance to the red or entry-level bundle would be attractive if it were less than 10% of the total input cost? This interactive nature of the polls is really important for us. So we hope that it's a way for you to give us some feedback and let us learn from you, but also we hope that this is a way that you can sort of participate in the webinar, because I know that panelists are the only people who have microphone access. So this is a way that we can hear your voice. All right, I'm going to close the poll shortly. Do you think adding insurance to the red or entry-level bundle would be attractive if it were less than 10% of the input cost? Submit those answers because I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to share those results really quickly. Looks like 55% of respondents said yes, adding insurance would be attractive, and 45% said no. So thanks so much for participating in our poll. Don't forget to submit your questions in the questions pane of the GoToWebinar software. You can access your handouts there. And I will now turn it over to Edward Baars, who will give us a little bit of information about his experiences bundling in the field.
Can we have the next slide, please? Yes, good day, everybody. Like it was said before, we're all over the planet, but it's day. Yeah, to recap what was said earlier, we see these incremental increases in profit where at the baseline or the white bundle, farmers basically only pay their own labor cost. And as soon as they start investing more, there becomes more of a profit, but then also an increase in cost, including some more labor requirements. Next slide, please. So I'd like to show you a little bit of how N2Africa, similar with its partners, have been demonstrating the technologies for soybean. We used 4 plots set together on 20 by 20, And then we had the baseline, no inputs, but then actually we did use the spacing. So it was more like the red one. And then the soybean plus phosphorus, soybean plus inoculation, and then the last one, soybean plus P in inoculation. And these were probably thousands and thousands of plots all over 11 countries in Africa. And some were then actually sampled and measured to great detail and uploaded on a platform. Next, please. So this is what it would look like in the field. You can see the difference in growth, color. Next, please. So these are some of the results. Every little dot you see is a plot. And then the conclusion or the main finding was that for about 1/3 of the farmers that were using pea fertilizer, that let's say that bundle or that input, which is actually not in the bundles promoted that we saw earlier. So the use of only pea fertilizer for 1/3 of the farmers, it was not profitable. But inoculants were using only inoculants was profitable for 90% of the farmers. And the combination of pea and inoculant again was profitable for 90% of the farmers. So the conclusion was, yeah, if you use pea fertilizer plus inoculant, then it makes economic sense to apply that. If you only use pea fertilizer, then probably that is less so. So that also stresses and confirms the importance of the bundling approach and how to use it in the right sequence. Farmers that only use pea fertilizer, maybe the next season they would change their mind and eventually maybe even choose other crops to grow or leave less land on the soybean. On the other hand, you see not all farmers are making profit. Some making very good, but there's always a percentage that even doing everything right, it didn't work out so well. So there's a variation in input response, and that also likely influenced the adoption in the market for inputs, from where we're going to talk more now. Next slide, please. Yeah, here you see like a way of looking at a model of what is now the reality in the field. We have our toolbox, our bundles, our inputs, our practices. They're heavily influenced by environmental factors, soil conditions, climate, and then, not least, they're very much influenced by farm factors and type of farmers, which has also a lot of adoption literature, what was mentioned earlier. From adding to that, maybe the latest is a lot also looking at perception and attitudes besides all the other physical and socioeconomic factors. And then still there will be a match. That type of technology at that time with those resources in that environment matches that farmer. And farmers experiment, they have seen it, and they say, okay, this I'm going to try, this I'm going to buy, this I'm going to use. So we can say stepwise input bundles are farmer-centric choice options. There's only one if, and that is if the inputs are available. Next slide, please. This was done from a survey of 3,000 farmers. Not all were growing soybean at that time. So from this sample, we asked them, if your most preferred soybean variety first of all, if you want to buy at a commercial price, your most preferred soybean variety, and farmers indicated their most preferred ones, which Chinkuma. Quite a number of farmers had a preference but couldn't get a real name for it. They call it this one, the not shattering one, or they didn't put a brand name on it, and Alpha-Yak and others. And they were asked then, where would you think it would be available, or where would you buy it? And then 88% said, well, we would not have an idea where to buy it if we wanted to for the next season. And another 12% would have a commercial source for it, which is actually not bad compared to legume seeds availability in Sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide. Next slide, please. In Auckland was a different picture because farmers are very much aware about seeds. But you first have to ask farmers, are you aware of inoculants, before you can ask them, would you like to buy it and where would you buy it? So let's say about half of the farmers were aware of inoculants, which was a surprisingly high rate compared to earlier surveys like in Tanzania, where that would have been half, maybe 20–25%. And we still see some variation in the regions. And then if aware, we would ask where would you buy it? Where would you anticipate to buy it for the next season if you want to buy it at that price? And 82% would not know where to buy it. Still, quite a number had an agro dealer or a local market or a community-based organization or a contract growing arrangement in mind where they anticipated they could buy it the next season, which was also a more positive picture from earlier surveys in other countries. Next slide, please. So we realized that maybe the availability of these inputs after the awareness was raised, which for seeds was high awareness, and inoculants, actually you have to tackle both problems, accessibility and increase still awareness. So we looked at some models, piloted some models for quantifying farmer diverse demand for inputs using ICT platforms. But not only ICT platforms, they're linked to an on-ground network of village-based advisors, agro-dealers, local seed businesses, input supply companies, and you could add maybe even microfinance or credit institutions. And we piloted this in Uganda on the M-Umalisa platform. And you can see here a diagram where we wanted to improve on that platform and even do seed certification, Ag Verify services, and how that interacts, fully digitalized from the platform to on-ground networks. Next, please. So this is like on the website from M-Umalisa, this has been some years back, but you could imagine this could be clusters of farmers where you have their registered, you know their background, you know basic demographics, and you'll be able to gauge their demand, which is collected from on-ground and USSD or SMS connections. And you could then look together with an input supplier, like how are we going to stock and how are we going to do our first pilot distribution of seeds, inoculants, and other inputs. So that is being piloted at the moment. Next slide, please. And to conclude, while we wait for the pilot results, the soybean stepwise incremental bundles can provide solutions for low productivity to all farmers, rich, poor, gender and age groups, because it's a menu. And maybe more research can be done, for example, as to what other services, inputs, or changes in enabling environment could even foster more adoption. Also, the integration of scientific disciplines, biophysical, socioeconomic, marketing research helps unravel the constraints and understand how best to intervene. And that is really a core business of research and NGO development, and to bring that as a service, business-to-business service to the private sector, because they often don't have the money or not the understanding of that, the money to do that kind of research. And then demand-led research leads to uptake of technologies. And then another conclusion is, or lesson learned, is that demand prediction quantification is key for continuous supply of technologies. This will reduce the risk in the supply chain and foster investment by the private sector. Thank you.
Edward, thank you so much for your comments today. We really appreciate your participation as a panelist in our webinar. I'm here just to introduce Mr. Abdul-Rahaman Tawfic, who will be talking to us about his company, Big Ajar Enterprises, and their experiences with input bundling.
Abdul-Rahaman Tawfic, agric engineer in post-harvest auction, Big Ajar Enterprise, Upper West region. Big Ajar Enterprise is 100% owned by Tawfic Abdul-Rahaman, registered in 2005. Big Ajar established an outgrower scheme in 2008 in West East, but developed over time with support from development partners. Currently, have 493 soybean farmers, males 441, female 52, operating in Upper West region of Ghana. Grain producers are 400 farmers representing 800 hectares, and certified seed producers are 20 outgrowers representing 150 acres. Big Ajar Enterprise have warehouse operating 500 metric ton capacity, certified warehouse with 3 tractors, 3 multi-crop shellers. Next slide. Input bundle and service provider. The input bundle provide per acre 15 kilograms of certified seed, Janguma and Afaya, but Janguma is a preferred for now. A bag of Yara legume fertilizer, 200 grams of inoculant, 1 liter of glyphosate, and 1 liter of post-emergency herbicide as the input bundle per acre. Service provided: tractor plowing services optionally, soybean technical assistance, threshing services. Input are supplied in credit before the farming season, and farmers pay back 3 bags of soybeans after harvest. Field staff monitor the activities of the farmers before, during, and after harvest. Input bundle is same for all farmers 2 acres, but tractor services is based on needs assessment. Next, soybean marketing constraint and next steps. Buyers buy soybeans from farmers after repayment of input credit, sell soybean grains to processing, poultry industries, open market in Kumasi, Accra, and Tema, and the Ghanaian market. Sell certified seed to local markets, other nucleus farmers, government institutions, e.g. MOFA, SADA, NGOs, Tutudeb in Tumu, and input distributors. Site selling prices are higher than the contract price. Side selling, I repeat, is common when spot market prices are higher than the contract price. Next steps. Plan to get tractors and mounted planters and threshers. Acquire more tarpaulins to outgrowers. Get additional tractors to replace depreciated old tractors. Thank you for now.
Mr. Tawfic traveled a really long way to be at SARI this morning to do this webinar. So I wanted to give you a special thanks for the accommodations that you made to be with us on our webinar today to talk about Big Ajar Enterprises. We will now transition into our reactor panel, a little bit of a different approach from some of the things we've done in previous webinars. I'm really excited to have two panelists with us to do a different form of interaction on today's webinar. Just wanted to give you a quick reminder to the audience that we have a questions pane on your GoToWebinar toolkit that you can submit questions and ask that we will address at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. We would really love to have your questions to answer, to give feedback to, so we can think a little bit about these input bundles and potential collaborations that could come out of this. So without further ado, I have two panelists with us today that are here to answer some questions. I have Simon Bajiba, who is affiliated with the Catholic Development Office and is working on integrating savings and internal lending communities to enhance access to ready cash among smallholder farmers' households. This is affiliated with the SILK program operated by Catholic Relief Services. Simon is based in Yendi, Ghana, and has 6 years of experience working in the credit sector. Also joining us today is Carl Jensen. Carl has his webcam shared. Thanks for that, Carl. Carl's an Idaho native with a farm background and is now the CEO of Good Nature Agro, based out of Chapata, Zambia. Good Nature is working to tackle challenges smallholder farmers face in Sub-Saharan Africa through a value chain approach. Carl and his business partner Sunday are actively bundling inputs in Zambia. First, I'd like to direct a few questions to Simon if he's with us today. Simon, can you unmute your microphone and join us?
Yes, actually, I'm online.
Great. I've asked Simon to not share his webcam so we can direct all of his bandwidth to audio. So please bear with us as we're just going to do Simon's part as audio today. So Simon, what are some of the options for farmers to obtain production credit? Meaning, where can they find financial resources to buy high quality seed, fertilizer, and inoculant?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the panelists on the webinar.
Just be sure to speak really close to your microphone so we can hear you loud and clearly, Simon.
Yeah, so with the research project, what we do for the main source of income for our farmers is through group savings. What happens, the group save between the 8 to 12 months, and that forms a cycle. The group loans give out loans to group members within the circle, and at share out, they take their lump sum together with their interest on their individual savings. So loan sizes are also limited to the individual members' savings. So as a principle, you take 3 times your savings in the case of a loan within the circle. And if you look at the way they assess loans, the process is quite less complex. Once you are in the meeting, you simply put in your request for a loan. Group members review that and they can easily give the loan if they don't find any problems with a member. So still with the research, we facilitate a linkage between the input dealers and our farmers who form the savings groups so that they can easily access inputs in their individual communities without input dealers charging them extra cost in terms of transportation. Now we have some microfinance institutions who go around and also give loans to farmers. But these institutions take payment at harvest, but their interest rates are normally higher than our groups. But then the loans are paid at the end of the season, the farming season. We also have very few of our farmers are able to access bank loans. And the challenge is because of collateral to obtain the loan. Most farmers in our case here have that can guarantee them a loan at the bank. We also have individuals, especially those who have tractors. They go around and assist these farmers mostly in plowing. But these individuals don't take payment in cash. They take payment in the form of food produce at harvest. And so I was happy when I heard Dr. Abdul mention it in his area.
Simon, I just want to reiterate a couple. I'm going to reiterate a couple of the points that you made because the connection is a little bit challenging. So, Simon, let me know that the iSearch program facilitates the process of linking up input dealers to farmers and the savings group that the iSearch program operates in, so they can easily access inputs even in their communities without extra costs to the farmers. So, as most of us know, obtaining credit is a difficult thing in Africa because a lot of the people who are smallholder farming don't have collateral to put up to obtain a loan. So this program allows them to pay off their loan payments in harvest, and they can even participate in some service provision by getting tractor operators to assist in plowing, which they also collect in sharecropping in return as well. So Simon, thank you so much for your answer. Thank you so much for bearing with us during some of the connectivity issues. I'm going to ask Carl a question now. Carl, you're in the seed business. Can you talk about the role of soybean seed purchases versus the use of save seed or brown bag seed? Any sense of percentages and trends?
Muted, the old trick. Yes, to us, I mean, in our view here in Zambia, it is very hard to come to numbers that you can really trust. But if you do look at the quantities of seed sold versus hectares planted of soybean, you can comfortably say somewhere in the range of 60 to 65% of planted area is done through certified seed purchase, which is really quite high compared to groundnuts, beans, cowpea, some of these other crops that we also deal in. So in soybean, I think we're headed on the right track. And part of that actually comes back, I think, to inoculants being a little more well known here than we saw earlier in the presentation in West Africa and other parts of the continent. So when farmers do start to appreciate that in order to get those inoculants, they're going to have to go to the same store where they would get certified seed, it, I think, helps bump the purchases.
Great, thanks for your answer, Carl. Simon, I'm going to return to you and ask a quick question. Should credit be bundled with seed, fertilizer, and inoculant as a complete bundle to assure success as a farmer? So again, the question is, should credit be bundled with seed? Okay, great, Simon. So the question was related to bundling credit with these input bundles.
Yes, because if it happens the farmer will have the full package that that will assist the farmer to increase in production and productivity.
Simon, the connection is
But
cutting out
we suggest
quite
that
badly.
the packaging should, however, be reduced to smaller sizes. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah, it's choppy. It's not a good connection. I'll be honest with you on that. So when we had our conversation yesterday, Simon let me know that if credit is a part of the bundle, it will assist farmer to have access to a complete bundle package, thereby increasing production and productivity. The package should, however, be reduced to smaller sizes, almost a step down as opposed to a step up, for smallholder farmers to have access because they're the most vulnerable populations in terms of having access to credit. Sorry for taking over, Simon. I want to be respectful of our time, and I know that you're trying really hard on your end to connect, and it must be frustrating. So I wanted to be sure that you had a voice. So I think I'm going to take over some of your questions for now, but I'm going to pop back to Carl. Carl, do you have any suggestions on how farmers might start buying soybean seed bundles like they do with hybrid maize, seed, fertilizer, and inoculum?
Well, first, Simon, I feel you on the connectivity. Sorry that's not working out. Happens here all the time. Well, our approach, and I appreciate the question, but our approach has really been to go beyond trying to make a product-based pitch, where we would be pitching, the merits of our genetics and showing data and charts and graphs on the effects of bundling, and instead start very small at the low end of the bundle, kind of just making the inoculant implicit with the seed purchase, but then incentivizing the sale of the seed and the inoculant together by giving what farmers really care about, which is market access. That to us is really the right motivation, the right entry point to get farmers interested in purchasing certified seed. So as a seed company, we work with large networks of farmers, and when we sell into these networks, that's the core of our pitch is if you buy Good Nature seed, we will connect you to a reliable, transparent, high-value market at the end of the year. And then rather than go around and actually physically aggregate or buy all of this seed ourselves, we use ICT, much as I think Edwin talked about before, to chart where all of this crop is throughout the year, how it's progressing, how many tons we expect, ultimately where those tons are stored. And then we serve as a broker, taking that digital information and shopping it across buyers to make sure farmers get the best price. It cuts down on side selling because you don't need an advanced contract. And for our interests, it is the right motivation to get farmers to use certified seed.
So speaking of seed, what is the toughest challenge in assuring your customers high germination levels?
Yeah, that really comes down to really effective monitoring of your seed chain, all the way from the breeders through, in our case, we use small scale multipliers at the end of the chain, and just a real commitment to quality. I mean, all of our farmers are monitored throughout the year. We have one agent for every 40 growers. There are a whole lot of practices that feed into that, but you just have to be committed to quality above all, willing to remove lots that don't meet standards, remove farmers that aren't following practices. It's really about sticking to the merits of the product and the grower.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. So this whole theme of this webinar is about bundles, and I know that Good Nature is doing bundles. So can you talk a little bit about what percentage of each bundles your business sells?
Yeah, definitely. On the sales side, we tend to shift a little bit lower where we have, I'll have to remember Pete's colors, but I think it's mostly in the yellow with the seed and the inoculant. And then a few more growers start to trend towards the inclusion of fertilizer. Often it's not just pea-based, but it tends to be a soya blend. Yara is the most popular, as we heard from the other panelists as well from PAE. And so you see farmers kind of naturally make that selection to include fertilizer. In our own network, or when we're involved in the credit of these bundles in any way, we always start at the baseline package of just seed and inoculant. And then we have pretty strict means of evaluating farmers through that first year to determine how much credit we want to extend the next. Specifically, we look at the quality of product they deliver at the end of the year, the quantity, the amount delivered to the buying point versus the amount produced, which is an indicator of side selling, adoption of best practices, and attendance at trainings, and then kind of a subjective measure to say, is this person a jerk or not? So each of those are weighted, those 6 factors are weighted, leading to a grower score of 0 to 100, and that's what determines what we offer to farmers in terms of which bundle.
Awesome. So how do you determine which farmer is ready for what bundle?
It always starts at the bottom and you have to work your way up. So it's looking at the number that comes out of all those evaluations, and then according to the score, we'll offer the highest, and the farmer can then choose, do they want to opt up to that level, or do they want to opt out and take a lower bundle? Very
cool. Carl, thanks so much for sharing with us today. I'm just going to go back and address a couple of the questions that I would have liked to have asked Simon. The third question was, what do you see as the future for farmers getting access to credit? And his remark was heavily weighted on organizing the farmers into cooperatives to allow them to gain strength in numbers. And then by creating these cooperatives, you can bring the farmer groups into linkages with market access, just like Carl was talking about. And also giving farmers marketing information and coaching them on how to create products that are desirable by the consumers. And also that ties into extension. There are a lot of different things that Simon was excited about, and I think that the iSearch project he's working on is multifaceted, but for sure the cooperatives was central to his answer on that question. And then the final question was, how can we incorporate credit into a bundle? And his highlight here was to keep interest rates low. He mentioned renegotiating with the government on planting for food, and also talking about external loans being given to groups and not to individuals to ease payment and to create less vulnerable situations for individuals. And then he tied it back to network availability with this cooperative market linkage that he discussed in the previous answer to the other question. Simon, I'm so sorry that we didn't come back to you. I know that it must be extremely frustrating. We really appreciate your time and dedication to this webinar and attempting to connect with us today. Connectivity is an issue that always circles back at the Soybean Innovation Lab, which is why we have a managed research area to try to figure out how to tackle some of the challenges related to connectivity in Sub-Saharan Africa. So thank you so much for your time and being with us today, and also your patience. You're going to see me for another minute or two because I'm going to launch a third poll. So the third poll question is, what sector can benefit most from a bundling approach? Extension and research service, private agriculture input sector, agriculture finance sector, off-taker sector, or other. This is your chance, audience, to submit your answers, to have a little bit of interactivity with our webinar, and to let us know either what sector you're in and how a bundle approach would benefit you in your work, or what you think the next horizon for input bundling or bundling or stepwise investment would be. So which sector can benefit most from a bundling approach? Extension and research, private agriculture input sector, agriculture finance sector, off-taker sector, or other. Looks like about 45% of our audience has voted, so make sure you get your answers in. Which sector can benefit most from a bundling approach? Extension and research service, private agriculture inputs sector, agricultural finance sector, off-taker sector, or others. And they give just another few seconds for this poll to be open before I close it and show the results. I will be closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so looks like 26% we're looking at extension and research service, that could benefit from a bundling approach. 59%, which is a vast majority of respondents, say that private agriculture input sector, which is not at all ironic because we're here to talk about input bundling. 11% believe that the agriculture finance sector could benefit, and 4% say other. Thank you so much for participating in our poll today. Don't forget we have one more poll for you to respond to. You can access handouts in the GoToWebinar pane as well as submit questions. Today's webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be circulated to you after the webinar has concluded. Now I'm going to turn things over to Duncan Sones, who will be spending a few minutes talking about the implications of the stepwise approach to input bundling. Thanks again, Simon and Carl, for your time this morning. Duncan, take it away. Duncan, I don't know if you're still connected or can hear us. We are ready for your section on implications of input bundling. If you're speaking, you are still muted.
Yeah, I'm speaking away merrily and I'm muted as anything. So yeah, here you've got me full throttle now. Hopefully you can hear me.
We'd love to see your face too. So if you could share your webcam, that'd be awesome.
How's that? Is that there?
I'm not seeing it yet.
I think that's it. Okay.
There you are.
So if that doesn't drive people away, nothing will. Okay, so what I wanted to do was to start to think about some of the issues and pick up and try and round off some of the issues that people have said. And when we did the poll a little while ago, 76% of you, in fact 83% of you thought that research data was important or very important. So that has some really important policy implications in terms of thinking about how research partners across the Sub-Saharan Africa start to consider the need for really good data to be collected in a way, in this sort of way for all crops and not just for soybean. And when Edward talked, he talked about some of the compendium of data that they've put together. So some of this data exists. But when we were trying to make messages across the sector, we found it very hard, as the African Soil Health Consortium, we found it very, very hard to find this sort of data to give detailed and authoritative recommendations to farmers about a stepwise approach. We can see that this can be embraced by extension and could make a massive difference to the extension area. And we see this sort of investment in the development of good research and the development of the infrastructure that we talked about and that was needed, those sorts of brokerage schemes that we saw from Edward and from Carl, as being the potential alternative to the traditional subsidy schemes, which have the advantage of they should have the longevity to really tie farmers into good behavior, which is based on sound business practices and isn't reliant on free delivery or very, very low cost delivery of materials. Next slide, please. We need to think about information, and at various different times that presenters have talked about the way in which they package information, and we saw a very neat package in that last presentation where the farmers' data is collected and that is all linked together. And there's an excellent example of the private sector getting on and doing that. There needs to be more encouragement for more of that sort of activity to happen. Edward also explained different approaches that were being attempted in other countries. But it's important to get good authoritative information on the stepwise approach out to the extension service and to input providers and off-takers so they all understand how the approach works. And we also need to make sure that we have information at a farmer level. And we showed you some attempts at that earlier, but actually those will vary in different places depending on how the bundles develop and the sophistication of the packages that we're putting together and the level of background understanding. And in some cases that will require some more detailed training about more sophisticated products, like, for example, the potential for insurance as a product. And I was interested that only about half people thought that was an important area. One of the pieces of research that we picked up along the way was that women in particular are very risk averse to going into debt. And so one of the reasons we started to look at insurance was to try to de-risk or at least take the weather element out of risk for soybean, to make women more confident about taking on the debt. And our perception was that for many of the farmers that was reluctant to build levels of debt, even in that red bundle stage, that could be mitigated by taking some of the uncertainty of weather away. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about some of the policy implications. We've talked about some of the need for better information. And finally, we're looking at that whole brokerage arrangement. And we've seen the quality and power of information in some of these presentations and the ways in which the different elements can be brought together. Now, this may require some very different approaches. For example, village-based agents that can sell at the farm gate, or incorporating bundling into anchor farming approaches, or it may be around some just incremental development of agro dealers so that they're able to take on more of the products that need to be in the bundle. What's for sure is that the data that was being provided by both Edward and Peter is very compelling in terms of the case for investing in farmers who are going through this sort of approach. And so I think and we heard a similar thing from Carl in terms of the way in which they were looking at those criteria to really try and encourage farmers, to try to sort out the farmers who were serious and who were investable. And it seems to me there's some very good opportunities for that within the information that we have here. But in order for the bundling approach to work, as Edward said, it's about making sure the inputs are available locally and that there is this alignment between credit, input, and output markets. We know from all the evidence that we see is that where anybody tries to intervene in the whole of the supply chain, or the value chain, but only works on the information or only works on the markets, or only works on the inputs and assumes that everything else will fall into place, then that tends not to be the case. What was interesting about what Carl said, I think, was that there's a real opportunity, I think, to start to differentiate the market for soybean. And one of the big off-takers in Ghana talked about two reasons why they didn't buy locally. One was the quality of local produce, and it tended to be dirty because there weren't enough tarpaulins, which was mentioned. But the second was that the varieties didn't have the protein content that they were looking for. And I think there's the opportunity going forward as we see these more sophisticated approaches to know exactly what varieties are out there, rather than seeing soybean as a generic, as one entity, but seeing soybean as in terms of what it can do for a different range of different markets and knowing who can best support those markets. And I think those are some of the ways in which the prices will be maintained, and we will be making a genuinely business-led approach. I mean, what was interesting is in terms of the fact that we talked about the business-led strategy for yield, and implicit in that was that part of the business-led strategy was that each of those elements would be profitable for everybody along the chain, and that everybody would be winning from these sorts of approaches. And I think we have the very strong data there to back that up. We also know that there are massive potential markets available. Most of the Sub-Saharan African countries are at a point where they are still importing large amounts of soybean from outside of the continent or outside of their countries. So there is the real potential, I think, for us to look at really promoting a stepwise approach that could make a real difference to farmers and really revolutionize the way that we give advice. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your insights, Duncan. I know I promised you another poll, but we really want to get to the questions so that we have a chance to interact with the audience. So I think we're going to skip ahead to the Q&A session, which will be moderated by Dr. Peter Goldsmith, the director of the Soybean Innovation Lab. So the questions have been collected throughout the webinar, and he will help direct some of those to specific panelists. Thank you so much, Duncan. And panelists, if you wouldn't mind sharing your webcam so we can see you as you respond, that would be great.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, great presentation, Duncan. Really summarized things well. We have a few minutes to answer a few of the questions. A ton of questions came in. We will respond to all the questions directly, so if we don't get to it, please don't worry. And if you need to drop off, that's understandable, but we did want to get some of these questions out because they're excellent. So let me get started. The first question for Mr. Tawfic at BA Enterprises comes from Abukar Diaria from Mali. Abukar works with the Syngenta Foundation there, and he asked, as I understand it, you're providing 5 types of bundles. Does each bundle cost 3 bags of soybeans?
So as each bundle.
Yes. So normally each bundles comprises the 3, gives you the 3 bags per acre to pay, the 3 bags maxi bag.
Say that,
maxi bag.
say that again.
120. 120, the 3 bundle, the seed, the fertilizer, the inoculant, the glyphosate, and the post-emergence gives you the 3 maxi bags, 120 kilograms per acre. That's 1 acre is to 3 maxi bag as the repayment in kind.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Tom, this is also for you, Abdul. Tom Shaw of Catholic Relief Services asks, how do you deal with side selling, the breaking of the bundle, selling glyphosate, seeds, fertilizer to others by the
Yes,
farmer?
mostly because of good, effective monitoring and good outdoor relationship. Some of them might have tells you what is on the ground, and because of effective monitoring, because we make sure that we go into the field anytime, any point T to check what we give out and what is going out. So effective monitoring gives us the chance to know the size selling of these inputs.
Great, great. So trust and relationships seem to be very important. And then another question comes from Stephen Chileshi from Zambia, from Zari in Zambia, the Zambian Ag Research Institute. Stephen is asking about Big Ajar's efforts to increase the number of women farmers participating in your schemes.
Yes, normally there are 52 that are participating in my scheme, 52 females.
And
out of the 430, 483, 52 are females.
And are there challenges for women farmers that are different from male farmers?
There's a challenge as issue, you know, as where I'm coming from, issue of land ownership to the woman is a challenge. The male owns their land. It's about land tenancy in Ghana, especially for where I'm coming from. The male dominates the lands more than the female. That's why there are 52.
Excellent. And then last question, I think I'll have to, there may be one more at the end, but for now, the last question comes from Rufai Isafu from Sweden. And Rufai says, thank you for the presentation. I'm a Ghanaian, but currently living in Sweden and would like to invest in commercial soybean farming in northern Ghana. I would like to know how accessible are markets to soybean farmers? Are there challenges selling into the market? And how do you deal with selling your soybean in the market? I think your screen is locked. Okay. Let's stop there and go to questions for Carl Jensen. Ashley, is that okay?
For sure.
Yeah, at least on my end, it shows that Abdul's has lost connection.
I would agree.
Yeah, Carl, are you there?
I think Carl also dropped off for a second, so I think he's trying to get back on.
Oh boy. Okay, well we can, yeah. Maybe give 1 sec. Oh, there's Abdul. Abdul, are you back?
Yes.
Yes, the question, we didn't hear you. The question came from a compatriot in Sweden who wonders about the quality of the soybean market as you sell the grains that your farmers, that you purchase from your farmers.
End market.
Yes,
Okay, there's a gap that is created for the end market where we are looking for international markets. If we produce more and they're out in the Ghanaian market, or there's issue of price fall, or we need to upscale to international market. So if that gap is created, where we need a third party or whoever that investor can come on board, if that aspect, which is one of the key cardinal points that we have for end market, is one of the area farmers are looking in. If they get better price, they produce more. If they get good, low price, they will stop producing or the price become lower.
Excellent. I think we've had a jinx with bandwidth. I don't think Carl, thank you, Abdul. That was perfect. I think that was very helpful to Mr. Isafu. I think we ought to wrap up our questions. It's now 10:15. Don't want to hold people too long. And Carl Jensen unfortunately lost bandwidth, so he had to jump off. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Sorry that the question and answer section got cut short, but connectivity is always a challenge for us. This concludes the input bundling webinar. Thank you so much to everyone for your participation. If we did not have the opportunity to address your question, we'll be communicating with you after the webinar to provide a written response. Today's webinar has been recorded, and a copy of a link to the recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email along with a link to the presentation slides. Once the webinar has ended, a survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill this out. We rely heavily on your feedback to learn how to improve our webinars and to find out what content you're interested in for future webinars. Thank you so much for your interest today and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.